Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Randy Fields on the line, and he is founder and CEO of Park City Group, known for one of its core products, ReposiTrak. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me.
All right, Randy. So we have a big topic today. So when you and I were preparing for this interview, I was like, I've done a lot of interviews, but I don't think we've ever really talked about supply chain trends, specifically in food safety, which is interesting to me because food safety, first off, one of the biggest industries is retail, right? Retail food, but food safety affects us all. So I'm excited to get into the nuances of, changes that are happening and trends. But before we do that, we'll start this interview the way that we do them all with our Mission Matters Minute. So Randy, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's our mission. Randy, what mission matters to you?
Well, it's problematic from where we are to even begin to cover the real mission. But the fact is, we see the world having adopted an inverted supply chain 25 or 30 years ago. Yeah. We would like to be of value to at least the food industry in improving on a whole series of, frankly, poor decisions made around how to run a supply chain. Yeah. And at the same time, inherent in supply chain, which really focuses on how much product should move between a buyer and a seller, there's really what we call the antecedent question, which is, should you buy anything from that seller? Should, as a buyer, you buy product that's likely to make your customers sick or kill them? And the answer is obviously no. So we see compliance management, we see food safety, et cetera, as all part of a supply chain activity. And we'd like to make at least a small contribution in getting people to do it better than they're doing today.
It's great. And love bringing mission-based entrepreneurs and executives on the show to really share why they do what they do, like what motivates them to go out into the marketplace and into the world and to make a difference. So great to have you on. And maybe just to get us started, tell us a little bit more about your background and maybe how you got started on this entrepreneurial journey.
I think I'm what's called a serial entrepreneur, meaning, and that's serial with an S, not a C. I've actually only had one job in my life, and that was when I was 16 years old, and I worked for a company for about 4 hours before they decided I wasn't a good fit.
A whole 4, huh?
So I think I've always been an entrepreneur. Some of your listeners may know my previous incarnation, which was Mrs. Fields Cookies. And so I have a long career in retail, and it was actually in the context of Mrs. Fields Cookies that we developed what was certainly one of the world's first real-time supply chains, where when we sold a cookie at the front counter, that triggered a series of supply chain activities that produced a very interesting replenishment system. So my first venture really was in retail, Mrs. Fields Cookies. We sold that in the early 90s, and I at least thought about retirement. That didn't work. So we began to look for how we could apply what we had learned in the world of Mrs. Fields around supply chain and vast amounts of data and timeliness. How could we apply that to other industries that needed it? And our conclusion, strangely enough, was that the retail food industry in the US, which is actually the largest industry in the world, interesting to note, the largest industry in the world, was extraordinarily rich with data and terribly poor with information. They were drowning in data. So we applied our technical skills, if you will, and managerial skills to develop some things that we think have been quite helpful to the retail food industry.
So there's going to be some people watching this, and just for context for everybody that's tuning in, we're recording this in January of 2022. So that being said, you're, as a serial entrepreneur with the S, not the C, as a serial entrepreneur, there's some people out there that are thinking about this entrepreneurship path, or maybe they were even displaced and now they're on this entrepreneurship path without even knowing they were going to be on it. Like, obviously a lot going on in the world right now. What kind of things would you say, obviously with the benefit of hindsight right now, being on this journey for so long, and, with some of the successes you've had, like, for example, Mrs. Fields Cookies, what kind of things would you tell to that next group of entrepreneurs that are out there right now going through it and really just trying to make it?
Well, you won't like my answer. I apologize in advance. I personally think that entrepreneurship is a socially acceptable form of compulsive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's some manifestation of truly mental illness. So I'm not sure I would encourage people to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, for those who have that bent, who feel that compulsion to do something like this, something in business, it's that recognize that the consequences are not all beneficial. So as a result, and it's personal, family, things like that pay the price for what you're doing. So I think to a certain extent, it's important to have something in your mission, either personally or business-wise, by which you recognize that you're just, if you will, you're just a vessel or a vehicle. And now the question is, ultimately, what difference do you make? So a lot of entrepreneurs think it has something to do with making money. Nah. Or something to do with God knows what. But at the end of the day, if you're lucky enough to be blessed with the financial success that compulsion leads to frequently, the real question is, what's next? What do you do with all of that? And that leads to some great soul searching, to be sure. So I certainly wouldn't tell my children that a great lifestyle is called being an entrepreneur. But if you have it, if you've got the disease and there's nothing else you can do about it, then
Randy, I love your answer. And just so you know, and I don't take this personally, but you don't watch my show often, because I always say I don't explain it quite the way you did as a mental illness, but I always say, who would sign up for this pain? Like, it's hard. And it's it's so much pain, and it's like you see the end result sometimes, but everything behind, and for the true, like, people that have been in it, like, and they understand what it takes to do, and what they a little further along in their journey, like, and they see somebody that's been successful or started something or had an idea from scratch. It's almost like you relate on that level of, oh, you signed up for the pain as well. Like, it wasn't easy, no matter what you read or see or anything. Like, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of pain involved, and that compulsion towards it. I like the way you explain it, but I'm laughing because I understand exactly what you're saying, and my audience has heard me say that many times. So thank you.
And as I say, it's not, you don't sign up to be an entrepreneur. You're compelled. It is a compulsion. And the consequence is you can't really lead a life that's anything like normal. You can't be in a conversation with someone about virtually anything without your mind going back to what else you can or should be doing in the context of your entrepreneurial bent. It's horrific. It's really
I knew I had a problem when my conversations started sounding like my interviews. I'm like, wait a minute, Adam, shut off your interview voice.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Absolutely.
True story. Absolutely. Oh, all right. Well, let me get us back. I had to get your insight on this, and you did not disappoint. So getting us back on track here. So I want to go further into. I don't want to quite skip to Park City Group yet, and of course ReposiTrak and some of the things you're known for. Let's go a little bit further back to kind of that transition period, and maybe where the world was in the 90s, and as you kind of decided that after Mrs. Fields Cookies, like, there was a bigger opportunity, really an opportunity to help, and specifically in the supply chain for food and compliance and safety. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about, like, what made that area so ripe for help, if you will? You said data rich, information poor. Like, go a little bit further on that one for me, please.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, what we found in our own business was that if you could if you could gather information, data quickly, process it quickly, and recognize how that data was linked to issues like supply chain or other activities in the business, you could ultimately improve decision making.
Yeah.
So in a strange way, we concluded that a business is really just a collection of decisions. And when that collection of decisions plays itself out, it does better or worse. And our experience was that you could significantly improve margins, revenue, but most importantly, customer satisfaction by getting close enough to the data and the information that it shaped the business. Let me give you an example. Every single customer complaint in the context of Mrs. Fields, everyone, no exception, got escalated up to Debbie Fields and Randy Fields. Everyone.
Wow.
Now, you could argue that stuff like that, just because it's a lot of data and information, could in fact be handled at, if you will, let's call them lower levels of the organization.
Yeah.
The problem was that if you will, every customer problem represented something that required senior management. In other words, was this systemic? Was it an accident? What was the root cause, and how do you deal with it? So in a way, what we concluded, if you will, early on in the world of Mrs. Fields, and that's certainly carried over since then, is if you start your business from the perspective of the customer, and every decision is made in the context of what moves the customer closer to their goal, how they can be successful, even if it's a great cookie. How do you make that a better overall experience? That gives you a framework by which everything else has to happen. So in the world that we looked at, we thought, well, how can we apply this kind of stuff to other industries? Because once we had exited Mrs. Fields, the real question was, what's act number 2? And it struck us that the technology that we had developed, which helped us operationally, supply chain, et cetera, really gave us enormous decision-making leverage. Let me give you a couple of quick examples. We developed very early on some decisions around the role of people in business. And this, I'm sure, sounds peculiar, but here's what we found. When we looked at, for example, a store manager or anybody in a decision-making role inside the business, we found that they really required 2 different skill sets. They required people skill sets, the ability to motivate people, motivate staff, motivate customers, just care about people, care. But we also realized that they needed another set of decision-making skills that were quantitative. How much should I order? How many should I make? Who should come in on the schedule at what time? And what we realized was, my God, these are 2 different skill sets, and the likelihood of finding humans that had both skill sets was pretty small. And then we asked a terrible question, which was, why would we be so lucky as we approached 800-900 stores to think that we could find 800 or 900 of the best people in the world to work for us in the context of having those 2 skill sets? So we made a strange decision. It turns out it worked out. It was, I think, lucky. We made a decision that you could only likely hire one of those 2 sets of skills. You could either find great analysts, if you will, who could quantify everything, order perfectly, plan perfectly, schedule perfectly, etc., or you could find people who had great people skills. We opted for the latter. So what we did was to say, we're going to automate every single decision in the business that requires the quantification skill set and leave to the human beings the people skill set. So the people would be responsible for the motivation of the staff, the motivation and care of the customers. And we put computers. We're probably, if not the first, one of the first companies in the world to put computers in every store. Every single store had a system that could take a look at weather trends, traffic trends in the mall, who was adjacent to that store, what the pattern was of interaction, if you will, with mall events and promotions. and plan how many of what type of cookie to make for that particular store. That's extremely difficult short interval forecasting, and very few people can do it. On the other hand, we could find people who are great with people. In fact, interestingly, when we were interviewing people, there was usually one great question at the beginning of an interview, and it was, "Sing happy birthday to me."
What?
Yeah, and about half the people we interviewed looked at us like we had 3 heads. And the other
half were in.
Got it, and they started to sing. So which group do you think had the people skills we were looking for? Obviously, people who could say happy birthday without shame. So in a way, we defined that business as a customer-centric business. Yeah. And as many decisions as possible had to involve putting people in the right slots and automating all of the rest of the decisions. Okay. Fast forward, what we realized is there's lots of industries like that. The largest industry in the world, as I mentioned, is retail food in the US. Retail food meaning supermarkets, convenience stores where people buy food, not restaurants, but the rest of food. And that they had the same problem we did, taking great care of customers, having products on the shelf, having the right amount at the right price at the right time. So basically we just said, well, it's a much bigger industry than we were in, but very similar problem set. How do we begin to create these tools, if you will, these technological tools that will become enablers for humans to do a better job? And that's really what we've done over the course of time. I don't want to sound immodest, but we've certainly been quite successful, I think, and our customers think so, at helping them do this kind of stuff. And the application to supply chain really it's pretty simple if you think about it. The real job of supply chain doesn't start back on the factory floor. It really starts at the retail shelf. So in other words, most people did all of their planning on the basis of what was being made and how much it shipped last month. And if you shipped that much last month, you should ship that much more or this amount this month. But very rarely was it based, and even today, is it actually based on how much is being sold at all of the shelves in retail stores in the United States. So what we've done, I think, is at least intellectually interesting, which is to reverse the supply chain, make it go backwards, start at the shelf, just as we did with our counter, and work backwards to the point of production. And interestingly, as I say, it's the same kinds of problems that we faced in Mrs. Fields, just different items. It wasn't cookies. It's everything from gallons of milk to bananas and deli sandwiches, you name it. All of those have inherently the same problem. How do you make, well, here's an example. If you go into your typical supermarket today, you'll find that for not for your value as a customer, but rather for efficiency purposes, whatever the hell that means, they tend to bake most of their bread in the morning. Well, who do you know that ever went into a grocery store at 7 a.m. to buy a baguette? Exactly nobody. But it's more efficient to do that. And our argument is, wrong decision tree. Work backwards from when do your customers want fresh baguettes, and then plan your production to achieve that. So everything in the supermarket industry, from the current out-of-stock mess to how much to order and which vendors to use, all of those kinds of problems are problems that in fact fall in this kind of supply chain space as we see. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to prattle there.
No, this is great. This is great content, great information. And I guess so the thing that comes to my mind as we continue in the discussion is in this world of farm to fork and just all these different changes that are happening. Where do you see, I won't say the problems, let's just say, where do you see some of the opportunities in the system, like in terms of like how systemic change? So the baguette example was a great example to make it relatable, but there's bigger opportunities out there. Maybe talk a little bit about that, like the system overall.
Well, you have to start with it's been broken. It remains
Yeah.
broken. So by definition, the opportunities are really enormous.
Yeah.
Some of them are decisions that were made maybe 25 years ago. So let me put that on the table, and then people can reject it or accept it.
Yeah.
A few decades ago, Toyota invented a concept called just-in-time inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the world's masters at it. And the idea is that inventory has a cost, a capital cost of carrying the inventory, an obsolescence cost, all of those kinds of things. So having too much inventory is really a bad idea.
Yeah.
And what you should have is inventory that arrives as you need it. It makes perfect sense conceptually.
Yeah.
It's just, here's the problem. When Toyota did this, they did it in the context of geography, meaning they would build an assembly plant and they would say to their suppliers, remember how large they were, and now they're the largest automotive company in the world, I believe. They were able to say to their suppliers, we have a great idea. You're going to put your plant on this piece of property.
Yeah.
So our plant manager can kind of roll out the back door or get on his bike and come see you.
Yeah.
So in other words, the travel time was minutes, not months, minutes. So the idea of just in time makes perfect sense if it's a short distance.
Yeah.
And
from that
interestingly,
context.
all of us as humans innately think that way. If you have a friend that is coming over from next door, if he was an hour late, if he were an hour late, you'd ask him what the hell happened.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if he was driving cross country and he was an hour late, you would go, oh, no big deal. So we innately know that distance equals missed time possibilities, that you're likely to be wrong. Okay. So everybody picked this idea up. It was written in the Harvard Business Review, which I think was actually an extension of Pravda to undermine capitalism. But anyway, great articles, lots of discussion. Supply chain experts said, oh, yeah, got to go just in time. So we began 25 or 30 years of reducing the size of warehouses, going from multiple sources of a product to a single source to shave a penny off the cost. And oh, by the way, just remember what the context was, which is why this was so stupid. The context was, frighteningly, that the cost of you're going to hear my dogs in the background. I apologize.
All good.
That what was happening
dogs,
was,
babies, everybody to the show. All good.
Yes, the cost of capital was falling. So there was moments in time when costs of capital were double digits. Well, so while we're thinning out inventories because of the carrying cost associated with inventories, the cost of capital was falling to approximately zero.
Wow.
So in other words, there was nothing to the strategy. The idea was simply misplaced and wrong, totally wrong. And the reality is that it never should have been done in the first place. As capital costs fall, it changes how you think about where you should make your investments. So for example, typical supermarkets years ago would have 2 months supply in their distribution centers. Now it's 2 weeks. And you wonder why they're running out of things?
Yeah.
So nobody has any carrying capacity. And when one guy leaned out his inventory, it concatenated backwards into the supply chain. So nobody has anything. So we just think that was all wrong, pretty much nonsensical.
Wow.
And it's produced the environment that we're currently in of systemic out of stocks. They're not, it's systemic at this point. It's not random. It's not caused by a truck, bad weather. It's a whole series of horrible sets of decisions that were made. So we're just very much of the opinion that that needs to change and that better forecasting, ordering, replenishment strategies can massively improve on that. And we do it.
And so now, and I guess taking that a step further. So how does this, and maybe just elaborate on like why this is so important to food safety and why it matters. I don't want to assume people get that part.
Yeah, we happen to have a belief, and look, it's a belief. It's not written on stone tablets anywhere. It's that compliance and safety are part of a supply chain activity. It's not some dominion in and of itself.
Yeah.
So you can't put safety onto a supply chain. It doesn't stick. Safety, food safety, compliance management, all of those activities have to be part of how the supply chain is run. And here's why, at least conceptually. Here's that 100,000-foot opinion, and it is just that, one man's opinion. It's that if you were to say, what's the job of supply chain? The job of supply chain is to optimize the flow of goods between buyers and sellers. Really the fundamental job of any supply chain system or capability. So the question, and I posed this earlier, how much product is the right amount of product to buy from a vendor whose output is going to kill your customers? And the answer, well, duh, it's zero. Right?
Exactly. I hope
but it is part of the decision matrix. It's part of that calculus. Should you be doing business with this guy? So a number of years ago, we partnered with the former Secretary of Health and Human Services under George Bush. His name's Mike Levitt, old and dear friend. We partnered with him after he left government to develop, if you will, the safety, compliance, traceability end of the supply chain as it relates to food. And interestingly, there was a very sweeping, fundamental change to food safety regulation that occurred under Bush, signed into law by Obama in 2011. And the nature of it was to completely re-regulate how food is handled, documented, et cetera, through the supply chain. Interestingly, 10 years later, 10 years, after lawsuits from California and citizens watch groups, et cetera, the FDA is finally going to do what that law had envisioned, which is to legally regulate that products that are high risk have to be traced from dirt to fork, if you will, from farm to fork. And that in doing that, we would more quickly be able to identify problems of safety and more quickly address them. So that's coming into the fore in the next year. And once again, you're going to find that the industry is, for the most part, flat-footed at the moment in terms of its ability to do that.
And so shifting focus just a little bit. So we know some of the issues now. Talk a little bit more about Park City Group and really how you're working to solve some of these challenges or opportunities that are out there.
Good. Well, at the end of the supply chain where the customer is, what we want is to make sure that when a customer goes into a retail store to buy something, that's actually there. How about that? So a big piece of the data analytics that we do and how we help our customers in the supply chain is to increase the likelihood that customers won't be disappointed. And here's why. It's pretty frightening. About 25% more or less of Amazon's total North American revenue comes from customers who first went to Amazon because they couldn't find something in a physical store. So if the job of food retailing in America is to increase Amazon's business, boy, I'd give them A+ grades.
I was going to say, everybody watching this has been through that. You're in a store, you're looking at something or you want something and you're like, I can't find it. You'd get it that moment if it was there. Then you pull out Amazon and you're like, oh, well, I'll send it then. And that'll be that. But everybody's done that in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. And here's what the stats say. More than 50% of the time, when a consumer goes into a store and he can't find what it was he wanted or she wanted, they go to a competitor, whether it's Amazon or someone else. So it makes no sense to me that you, from a marketing perspective, you would focus on much more than just that. What if you were the only retailer who was always in stock? What if your prices weren't what if toothpaste was a dollar, was,
Yeah.
priced at $1 was a penny higher than your competitor? Do you really think you'll lose customers for that? Or more importantly, are those the customers you care to lose? Yeah, they are. What you really want is to be known for, if you want it, we have it.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this trend, and it's been very good for our business. And so I apologize, this is a bit self-serving. The reality is that our ability to help people reduce out of stock significantly is an important part of our business. But that backs all the way up into the supply chain. Because if you start at the shelf and work backwards, it means that at each node, from the shelf to the back room of the store, from the back room of the store to the distribution center, from the distribution center back to the manufacturers, in each one of those nodes, you have to get better and better and more precise at your forecasting and ordering, and that's what we do.
And so looking one step further on that path, shelf space, like type of products, like SKUs, like how does all that play into it? Like get a little bit more granular.
Yeah, this is sad.
Yeah.
This part of it is actually sad. Over the last 10 or 15 years, consumers have become much more fractionated, maybe to use a word here, in terms of what they want. So, for example, when I was a child, and my mother would take me to the grocery store, and we needed mustard, there were 3 SKUs of mustard. There was French's mustard, small, medium, and large. Which do you want? Well, one of our customers is one of the best-known retailers in America. Today has more than 200 different SKUs in mustard. 200.
Wow.
Now,
that's a lot of mustard types.
Oh yeah. Well, but let's think about how that hurts. It's strange because you would argue, well, good for this retailer. They're following the consumer. The consumer wants organic, non-GMO, made in Vermont in somebody's bathtub over a weekend. Okay. We've got that one. And we want it in small, medium, and large, and we want it in glass, not plastic containers. Oh my God. So now you've got 25 SKUs of that. So what's happened is the industry, because of this SKU proliferation of these GMO, non-GMO, organic, natural, local, you name it, all of that, fair traded, etc. What that has done is to cause the grocery store, the supermarket, to be able to stock less of each one of those. In other words, if I have 200 SKUs of mustard, to have depth on all of that would be millions of dollars of inventory. And that's just mustard. So now what? So what's happened is the proliferation of SKUs driven by these unusual consumer desires is driving out of stocks. So what's weird is you may want that mustard from Vermont, but your local supermarket probably can't carry it, or they only had 2 bottles and your cousin Frank came in yesterday and he bought them. So conceptually, the industry, in an attempt to meet consumer demand, has suffered from a degree of SKU proliferation that's driving most of their customers out. It's pretty weird. Half of their customers are going to leave because they can't get what they want. So this will resolve itself in the next few years. You're likely to see fewer of those kinds of SKUs. There'll be the specialty stuff you probably do have to go to Amazon for, or someone. But it's a very difficult problem. It's destroyed balance sheets. Although it's made it easier for your audience, entrepreneurs, to figure out, well, what's the 201th form of mustard that I can invent and get on the shelf? So it certainly helped that entrepreneurial thing in America, but it's just not sustainable. It will. And
the interesting thing here, I like your example because 200 plus or whatever it is in terms of mustard. So we're not going quite back to the Henry Ford days where you can have any Model T color you want as long as it's black. So we're not saying that, but we're saying that now through things like ReposiTrak and Park City Group and the work that's being done, you can kind of have the best of both worlds, right? Like if this is done properly, so you can have the adequate amount, which I'm not claiming I know that amount of mustard to meet your consumer demand, to where it's all logical. So you're not just adding to add, and you're not diluting maybe that consumer journey or experience when they enter your doors, right?
Bingo. Now, if you take that notion,
yeah,
and you couple that with changes in the regulatory world now around traceability, now you've taken an already difficult business. Remember that retail food in the US is a very difficult business from a profit perspective. Consumers may not like the prices they see on the shelf today. That's certainly an issue. But retailers make 1% to 3% before taxes. So there's very little money in it. It's a very difficult business to execute well.
Yeah.
And now there's a regulatory change coming around traceability, in which the FDA is going to require that huge quantities of records now be kept as products move through the supply chain.
Yeah.
And that the creation of those records, the labor, et cetera, is about to take an already difficult business and potentially add a layer to it that will cause some people to have heartburn. Would be the best thing that they'll get. It's really a problem, but it's going to happen anyway. It's now inevitable.
So what do you see as with this new regulation and this new traceability, like, and let's just say some of the industry or whatever percentage it is kind of being caught flat-footed, right? Not prepared for this. Like what do you see happening next? Like, not telling you to have the crystal ball, but what do you think is going to happen next?
Well, this is the proverbial rock and a hard place. And here's what happens,
isn't it?
Yeah, if you go back to the Food Safety Modernization Act, called FSMA lovingly. FSMA, as I said, came into existence in 2011, and the idea was to take high-risk foods, and think romaine lettuce, et cetera, and make sure that there was very quick traceability. So when an inevitable problem occurred, you could quickly identify the source, track the product back, get it off the shelf, make sure that it wasn't continuing to sicken people. Because today, it takes months. So the question was, what does that look like? And here's what happened. It died. It literally just died. The industry pushed back and said it's too expensive. We don't have the technology, et cetera. So the FDA, for all intents and purposes, backed off the mandate that it had from a regulatory perspective to do traceability. Well, state of California picked up their javelin and threw it, and they went right through the heart of the FDA. So the FDA signed a consent decree, a legal consent decree, after this lawsuit with California and citizens watch groups, that they would bring the regulation as had originally been intended around traceability of high-risk foodstuffs. So last year in September, they published the list of things that are going to get tracked and traced. They simultaneously announced, oh, by the way, this is just the beginning. We will trace everything eventually, kind of. Sort of a not too subtle hint. And in the course of this year, by the end of the year, they have to publish the rules and regulations around that list. Wow. So traceability is coming. Nicely enough now, consumers like it. This idea, I hate the word, but let's call it transparency. So consumers like this idea of transparency. Traceability will speed up recalls. We think there's very good economics in the whole issue of traceability. So it's coming, but it's going to be a difficult, bumpy road as the industry adopts technologies. We happen to have, because we're a supply chain company, we've known how to do this for 20 years. We can track and trace any product. It doesn't have to be the ones on the list. So we'll be a contender. We think that our technology is simple, it's easy, it's so cheap, it's absurd. So we want to present to the industry our solution, and our solution is one that we think will gain widespread adoption. We've been working with a number of very well-known retailers and wholesalers, and they're very pleased with what they see, and we know how to scale this. We're already highly scaled. So traceability, we think, is pretty good for consumers. I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's amazing. It's not. It's not amazing. It'll be a nice increment to regulation. A nice increment. It's time for it to happen. We think the industry's ready, and we're coming to market with a technology that we think is likely to become the dominant technology in traceability. So I'm not touting. I'm trying to do that, but we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah. And so, telling us, what you can about the technology, like tell us a little bit more about that, and like what, because at the end of this, I'll give you, of course, the opportunity for to leave any, websites or however you want our audience to be able to connect with your team. But I want to make sure that the right types of organizations do connect. So, what are you looking for? What's typically a good, a good partner in implementing this technology?
Well, I think when most people imagined what traceability would look like, and look, we're humans. We all tend to do this.
Yeah.
I think we all said, oh, wait, we know how to do that. We just have to put a label on everything and put a traceability code on it or some screwball thing like blockchain. Don't get me started on that. And as a result, we'll be able to track and trace everything. Well, the problem is the people who thought about that had never been in the retail grocery business.
Right.
Because you can't afford to have a human being every single step scan a case and figure out what the hell's in it.
Yeah.
In other words, let's see, leaves the farm, scan it. Arrives at the packing house, scan it. Leaves the packing house, scan it. Arrives at the distribution center, scan it. Leaves and so on and so forth. Each one of those scans costs 10 or 15 or 20 cents, which means only Midas will be able to afford tomatoes at the end of the supply chain. It's a non-starter. The idea is wrong.
Yeah.
So just like we did thinking the supply chain was backwards, we thought that was kind of a backward idea.
Yeah.
So we've developed a technology. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's not that it's too proprietary, but
that's fine.
It's boring. But the idea is, let's take all of the existing technologies that there are today, and let's just extract data from all of them. All of them. We don't care which one anybody's got. Just send us a data dump. And we have an interesting technology that can put all of that together, concatenate the records, so we can create an electronic pedigree from farm to fork at essentially no cost.
Wow.
So the idea that we have is we're not going to charge retailers for the service. We're not going to charge wholesalers. We're going to charge suppliers, and we're going to charge them a very nominal fee. I mean, we're thinking less than $200 a month, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
All they can eat, as much as they ship, as many customers as they have, unlimited tracking and tracing.
Wow.
So what we think we've done is to have and look, this is a technology we've had for a decade. It's just used for a different purpose. So we're repurposing our supply chain technology to do this traceability lot code stuff. And we think the industry's, I'd be surprised if the industry doesn't really look at it and go, wow. In fact, the people we've talked to so far look at it and go, how can you do it that cheap? And the answer is, well, we've already built the technology. That's a sunk cost. So our costs are really incremental electricity and some people and stuff like that. So, I'd like to say we'll take the industry by storm, but that inherently sounds funny. But hopefully this will become an industry standard.
It's exciting stuff, Randy. And I think it's really interesting to me to see, just to track your career as we've kind of spoken and think about, this started initially when you're pretty young man, just getting started as an entrepreneur, figuring out how to, solve the problems of cookies, right? Getting those out and creating that franchise. And then now you're tackling food in the United States, essentially. And then you're really working at and solving some of the problems at the highest level on the supply chain for food and retail. So I think it's just an amazing story. So I just have to ask. So what's next? What's next for you? What's next for Park City Group and ReposiTrak?
Well, I'm pretty focused on the here and now. So for
Yeah.
what's next for the company and therefore for Randy is we're spending this whole year getting ready for this traceability initiative that's going to be mandated this year. It'll happen in November, maybe sooner. And, you know, we've cleared the deck of obstacles and pieces of the business that we think were in the way. Because when people wake up one morning and they see the published regulations, they're going to need a solution. They're going to need a solution they can adopt quickly and inexpensively. And it's certainly our hope that we will be that. You know, there's no certitude to it, but I'm hopeful that our business reputation and our ability to scale. I mean, we already process, I don't know, just 15 to 20 million transactions a day of this sort. So we're capable of doing what the industry needs. And I think the question is, you know, how that all plays out over the next several years. We're certainly optimistic about how we'll be impacted. And we think it'll be good for the industry as well.
How can people that are watching this and want to learn more follow up to connect with you and your team to learn more?
Well, probably our websites. We have two, parkcitygroup.com and Repositrack, Trak, how's that? Repositrack.com. That's the product set. And there's plenty of ways to contact us if people are interested. They can even reach out to me. How's that?
Perfect. And we'll put all those links and stuff, website links and whatnot in the show notes so that our audience can just head right on over and check out what you're working with and connect with you and your team. And to the audience, if this is the first time connecting or listening to Mission Matters, just so you know, we're a platform that's all about really amplifying the messages of mission-based entrepreneurs, executives, and experts, people that are out there making a difference and really going out into the market and doing great things. So if that's the kind of content that you're interested in, we invite you to hit that subscribe button because we have many more mission-based individuals coming on the line and we don't want you to miss a thing. And Randy, really, this has been a great episode and interview, and it was a pleasure having you on the show to learn more about, of course, your story, the story you have in business, and to get your insight to an entrepreneurship. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate the opportunity.